police have got a very defensive position there with all the shields up. But this looks doesn't look like a good situation. Police just advanced. Everyone's running to get out of the area. That was like big time in the eyes and throat and stuff. Damn, that's hard stuff. So it's a big story of these protests and riots on 15th of November, the 15N in Mexico City, and protests and also some disturbances in other parts of the country. So I was there in Mexico City covering this, and it's a video taking through what I saw on a day, and this is to make sense and analyze what happened on the day. Now, it's not only a significant news event because of the level of the disturbances themselves, the number of police injured, the number of protesters injured, the number of protesters arrested, but it's also a hot political potato. It has big implications within Mexico, in quite a tense moment suddenly within Mexico, and of opposition to President Claudia Sheinbaum, and questions of the cartel wars and violence, but also in a tense time with the United States, with the threats of unilateral US military attacks into Mexico, with the attacks on alleged drug boats in the Caribbean and Pacific, with the United States looking for indictments of Mexican politicians on drug cartel charges. So this makes it very politically incendiary, this events. Now, as a journalist, I'm trying to cover this as down the line as I can, to show what I saw on a day, to analyze things and things I saw with a clear mind. I'm not coming from this an angle in favor or against the protesters or the government. You can check out my work. I've got 25 years experience working as a journalist, published thousands of stories in more than 100 media publications, including some of the biggest names. So although this is, I understand, a very incendiary issue right now, and people are seeing anything they come out as being propaganda from one side or another, then I hope a lot of you can keep an open mind and look about trying to understand the facts of what is happening in this situation, and that's what I try and help bring with these videos. If you like these videos and you want to see more of them coming, it makes a real big difference if you subscribe to this, totally free, wherever you get your videos. I've got some really good guests coming on, some great stories. We can't do this without you. So the first word of the demonstration came several weeks ago, and it was, came out that what was known as the Generation Z, the Generation Zeta, who'd been active in Nepal in massive demonstrations there, bringing down the government of Nepal, was going to have demonstrations in Mexico. And there was this symbol, this kind of skull and crossbones symbol, this idea of this the Generation Z. So the messages from the Generation Zeta have been a mix of things. There have been some just talking about being against violence. In Mexico, there's more than 30,000 murders a year. Some against what they call a narco state or narco corruption, meaning political power being infiltrated by drug cartels. But also there was some which was more straight political, calling for the end of Claudia Sheinbaum's presidency. Now, while this was developing on November the 1st, you had the assassination of the mayor of Uruapan, Carlos Manso. A very brutal assassination. He was shot dead at point blank range, allegedly by a 17-year-old assassin working for the Jalisco New Generation cartel. He was in an event for the Day of the Dead in the city of Uruapan, and he'd been a very outspoken mayor against cartels, who had his own movement known as the Movimiento del Sombrero, the movement of the sombrero. And he'd been in a certain conflict of words, of tension with President Claudia Sheinbaum. So people from this Movimiento del Sombrero, from Uruapan, said they were going to march as well on November the 15th in Mexico City and around the country. Then on November the 13th, Claudia Sheinbaum gave a press conference where she was saying that this march was being orchestrated by right-wing forces, and there was, speaking at the press conference, was a coordinator of what they called Infodemia, looking at the information networks, and saying this was right-wing figures, including ex-presidents Vicente Fox, business leaders like Claudio Gonzalez, other Mexican billionaires, some who were involved in disputes over tax issues like Ricardo Salinas Pliego, who were pushing and funding this demonstration as disruption. They didn't make accusations there was a foreign government behind this, but it started to be this idea floating online of people saying, oh, this was some kind of CIA op, color revolution to destabilize Mexico, which I'll go a bit more into at the end. So on the day of the march, I arrived at the Angel of Independence about 10:30 in the morning, and initially it was a fairly small turnout, 5 or so thousand, but it very quickly grew in size. I would say to the tens of thousands of people getting to the Zocalo. And I talked to interviews with maybe 10 different people in the crowds to get a sense. The people were from various states around Mexico. I talked to people from Michoacan, from Jalisco, from Guerrero, from Mexico State. And the people I interviewed at least seemed to be genuine protesters with different gripes. They had various issues about the instability, the corruption, and calling for change. They might well have had political affiliation as well. But it wasn't very clear, obvious political groups like you get a lot of demonstrations of blocks declaring certain politics. It was notable that it wasn't especially young. There were young people there, but it wasn't, a real generation seta, super young people. It was generally a real mix and cross section of ages. Now, getting into the Zocalo, one of the strange things was that normally in marches like this, there are speakers, but there were no speakers, and it was very quickly just a focus on people trying to break down this big metal barrier that had been put up by the government to stop people getting to the presidential government palace of Claudia Sheinbaum. And people, they very quickly started hacking away at it and breaking, trying to break the barriers. There were people who had bought tools for this and were using them to try and break through. And the police were responding, and they were firing substances into the square, which I'll get more into in a little while.
It's been quite nuts here in Mexico City. The people trying to break through the barricades outside the Palacio Nacional on this march against narco-corruption, and the police are firing a lot of tear gas out, and it feels a very tense atmosphere right now here in Zocalo Square in Mexico City.
One thing about the crowd is actually quite a lot of them were not wearing masks. A fair number of them were, but quite a lot of them were not wearing masks, which is quite surprising. And it wasn't the typical black bloc of anarchists from the kind of university kids that you'd often see. They seemed to be different, but it was quite hard to judge exactly who the people were really getting stuck into the violence. However, it did seem to have a lot of support across the square. Like a lot of people, there's a very angry mood in the square. A lot of people shouting and angry and very, shouting things about against the government, but also about narco corruption and so forth. And then they did quite quickly break through the barriers and get right up to the lines of police.
So these were all the barricades that were blocking the National Palace that have now been ripped apart, and everyone's now standing right up against the lines of police. It's looking tense, and I think it's very likely to go off right now or very, very soon. It's a very tense front line there against the police. A lot of angry people. The police, I think, are going to react soon. The police have got a very defensive position there with all the shields up. But this looks doesn't look like a peaceful place.
Now, we did see people trying to break into various buildings, including this one here, and that's a pretty nasty spray there on the door. It's quite an anti-Semitic reference to President Claudia Sheinbaum, and you see a lot of vandalism and people trying to sort of break in stuff around the area. As people pushed up against the police started throwing rocks back at the crowd was throwing at the police, and also firing more substances into the crowd. Now, there's been a bit of a dispute about exactly what the substances are. Most of the media have described them as tear gas. Some members of the Mexico City government or supporters of the Mexican governing party have said, oh no, they don't fire tear gas. They fire dry chemicals from fire extinguishers as for crowd control. Now, according to Chemistry World, tear gas is a generic term for a number of lacrimatory agents used by law enforcement across the world to control riots. The name describes the effect. It causes severe eye and respiratory pain and causes tears to flow, leading to incapacitation. It can include CS gas, which is in fact a kind of white powder, and different things. Now they can be fired from like rifle type things which fire capsules, and they can also be fired from canisters. Now, were the Mexican government using some of these or using them from a canister rather from a gun, and that's why they're saying it wasn't regular tear gas, or were they actually firing fire extinguisher dry chemicals? Now, if they were, then it says here, according to Google, it says about using fire extinguisher, which would be also used as a form of tear gas, because it's also causing the respiratory conditions and the eye to dry up for people to go away. According to the Google, the risk of using a fire extinguisher on people, it says standard dry chemical fire extinguishers should never be used for crowd control or directed at people, as they are not designed for human exposure and problems of respiratory harm, vision impairment, physical injury, and others. So now, I don't think it's a huge deal if they're using tear gas. It's kind of a standard crowd control thing used in many countries. I'm surprised that the Mexico City government are trying to say they're not using it and are using fire extinguishers, which would not be so standard. But that debate is there, and that was a part of what was happening, and how I personally got gassed later on. Now, the standoff was broken, and there was quite a chaotic situation. There was the police pushed forward and broke into a pretty hard, open fight in the Zócalo. Colleague Julio Rosas got very close and got this footage, which he allowed me to use. And this does show here protesters pretty hard beating up some of the police officers and giving them some pretty bad injuries that you can see there. I was following a group that was getting pushed down this side street. You see the policing advancing, pushing people back, and then people heading back against the police here.
Okay, whoa! Police are like forcing everyone back. They're forcing everyone out of the Zocalo, and it's a lot of stones being thrown on both sides. The police are swinging to get people out. Okay, who's going to run? They're advancing. Okay, police are advancing. Okay, they're running now.
¡Estoy grabando! ¡Asesinos!
I got gassed a bunch of times, but that last time was really hard. It was really hard tear gas to get out of the area. That was like big time in the eyes and throat and stuff. Damn, that's hard stuff. After I got some more water on my eyes and recovered from the tear gas, I got back round and found a way back in to the Zocalo, and the police had fully taken the square. And so the main part of the protest had been, the main threat as far as the government was concerned, had been removed. But there were still skirmishes going off around the side streets into the night, and I still saw them arresting various people being arrested and taken into custody. The police gave an initial count of 40 arrests and 120 injured people, including, they said, 100 police officers and 20 members of the crowd. I think that number sounds low for members of the crowd being injured from what I saw, and I also think the number of arrests might well go up substantially from that, but that's the number they gave. So a few conclusions about this. The first is from actually my reporting on the streets and talking to people. I think several things can be true at the same time. So it can be true that there are certain groups or individuals or certain interests who have been pushing, political parties, political affiliated people have been pushing this demonstration and wanting trouble for the government of Claudia Sheinbaum. And at the same time, there can be people who go down to the demonstration who are very angry about conditions in Mexico, in their communities, about violence, about corruption, about drug cartels working with local government, and just very angry and want change. And there's been this problem bubbling up for years in Mexico that people are looking for answers to. So those two things can be true, and I think it's when you're looking at these things from afar, just looking on social media or reading some things, I think it's good to try and look a bit deeper into these things and talk to people and try and understand the deeper situation rather than just making very quick conclusions. The second thing about the idea of a CIA regime change. Now, I'm not naive about CIA regime change, and I followed these CIA regime change going back to Guatemala under Jacobo Arbenz in the 1950s, to Chile in the 1970s, to Iraq, Afghanistan. I've got another video out about Venezuela, where the United States is quite openly pushing for regime change and says the CIA is doing operations there. But just thinking it through, in Mexico, there's no clear case for a regime change. First, there's no clear path to a regime change in Mexico. Claudia Sheinbaum won the election very tidily, with 2-1 votes compared to the opposition. That's a massive contrast to Venezuela, where, according to the opposition, the official candidate of Nicolas Maduro lost. So Sheinbaum won. There's no clear opposition to try and change it with. And also Claudia Sheinbaum is working with the United States in terms of slowing migration and fighting drug traffickers. Trump is putting pressure on this, but there's no clear path or motive in that same way for regime change. And again, I know that these things have happened, and you can feel passionately about these things or see them, but I just don't see the motive. And this was not like this riot and protests were troubling for the government, but this is nowhere near anywhere close to toppling the Mexican government, nor should it do. But there is a very tense situation in Mexico with this. There's the government of Claudia Sheinbaum is still popular, and there's still a lot of people who are very passionate about this government and feel that it's brought them more rights and more wages and has supported working class people more. And there's a lot of people who are very angry about it and very angry about what is going on and still seeing certain conditions they live under in places like Michoacan, with these like assassination of a mayor who stands up to cartels. And the Claudia Sheinbaum government from Morena party, which is a left-wing party, they're very keen not to be seen as the repressive side. They're very sensitive about these accusations, but also making a lot of accusations themselves against other people, including against journalists, Mexican journalists, according to certain people out who they feel are not going along with the government enough, and people like myself going there just to cover a demonstration, take the risks to get the news straight. So a tense situation, and it could get tenser getting into the World Cup 2026 next year, which should be a nice World Cup in Mexico, the United States and Canada. And I hope there won't be this trouble there, but there could be trouble brewing. So I'll be keeping an eye on this situation and hoping it will get better, but we'll see. There's many problems in Mexico to resolve. Being a narco journalist, there's a lot of blood and sweat and beers. So if you want to keep these videos coming, then you can support this for completely free by subscribing on whatever platform you're watching this on. And you can go to www.crashoutmedia.com, where you're going to see all kinds of news and analysis and reports and be the best informed in the room about the drug war. And if you want to support this, then you can for just $5 a month, the price of a cup of coffee.